Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today we're using technology in the studio. We're using Skype to talk to a local writer, and I say local, she's from Bakersfield, but right now she's in the great state of Texas. Welcome to the program, Jane Hawley. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
So you're in Texas right now. Tell us how it's going over there.
Oh, it's good. I'm in graduate school at Texas State University, which is in San Marcos. It's about 20 minutes outside of Austin, Texas, where there's a lot of great live music. And we just had a cold spell, so we're all shivering and complaining because no one's used to the cold weather here, but it's been good.
Tell us a little bit about the undergraduate work you did. I mean, you start in Bakersfield, and then you go to Wyoming, and now you're in Texas. So tell us a little bit about the selection of schools and how that worked out.
Well, I have a family connection to Colorado and Wyoming, so that's one of the reasons I ended up out there. And I just really liked the wide open spaces, the beautiful, beautiful landscapes up in Wyoming. And they have a really good English department up at the University of Wyoming. So I went out there and then I came back to the Valley for a while. And then I came to Texas. But unfortunately, one of the reasons I had to leave the Valley was because there weren't very many graduate school opportunities for creative writing. As far as I know, there's only one that you can attend in Fresno. At least in person. So I decided I had to leave to get graduate school education.
When did you decide that writing is what you want to do? I mean, you know, you're a writer, and we're going to talk about an interesting piece of work that you've done, but when did you decide that this is what you want to do?
I think a lot of writers can tell you that they were readers from a young age, and that was definitely the case for me. I don't think I started getting interested in writing until I was a teenager. And I read a book called The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, and it was about a young woman, a very literary young woman. And I thought, maybe I could do that because I recognized myself in the main character of that book. But I didn't do a lot of writing until after I graduated college and started going to the Random Writers Workshop in Bakersfield. Um, and I just felt that need to express myself in a creative way. So probably not until I was about 22.
Talk a little bit about the Random Writers Workshop. We have to give our friend Nick Valerides a plug because, you know, we've had him on this show before, and so he talks a lot about the Random Writers Workshop. Tell us a little bit about that workshop.
It was a small community-based workshop that Nick ran, and it still lives on in Fresno, where Michael Madrano runs it now. And then Nick will be back for a while this spring to run more workshops in Bakersfield. But it was just a community gathering of people who wanted to write all sorts of different genres, YA, literary fiction, poetry, anything you could think of. And we would get together and read each other's work and criticize it constructively and help each other and have readings. And it was just good to have a workshop that was outside of academia, but still rigorous enough to improve yourself.
I mean, so in sports, let's say that you're a baseball player, and when you practice swinging enough times and hitting the ball enough times, you see the ball go further and further, and eventually you hit a home run. In writing, is it the same way? I mean, can you tell when your writing is getting bit better?
Oh, I definitely think so. With creativity, there's always, a spark. Some people start out with a very original voice or vision. Sometimes it takes some people to develop that, some time to do that. But once you start practicing and writing, it's kind of like that whole Beatles thing. Like if I play 10,000 hours, then I'll be really great. Well, if you write 10,000 pages, hopefully you're going to improve. So it's definitely an element of practice.
You know, I was fascinated to learn about one of the topics that you selected to write about. You selected to write about the Mexican drug violence or Mexican drug trade violence. Can you talk about that?
I started getting interested in that in about 2005, 2006, when some of the media coverage in the United States peaked for that, when it was kind of still the rumblings of it were going on. And I used to visit Mexico, but it became too unsafe to go by myself, especially since I don't fluently speak the language. And I started researching, like why is it considered unsafe for certain people to go there, at least in the border towns where it was the most violence was going on. And I just read a lot about it. There's something called the Narco blog. I read a lot on that, researched it, and it was just fascinating to me that these things could be going on so close to the United States. I mean, Juarez is practically blended into El Paso in Texas. And that was one of the most violent cities in the world for a while. And so I was just very fascinated that we didn't talk about it in the United States as much as I thought it deserved to be talked about.
There's in one of your writing, there is a suitcase and a bus. Talk about that.
So, my short story called The Suitcases of San Leon takes place when a bunch of suitcases are left on an empty bus that's supposed to have passengers on it, and they've disappeared. And that's how these bus depot employees figure out that the cartel has done something to them. And so the story follows the story of the suitcases and where they go and what those bus depot employees do with the luggage and how that morally implicates them in the drug war and the crimes going on then.
It was published in something called Day One. Tell us about what Day One is. And a second part of that question is, how has Day One helped you as a writer?
Day One is the literary magazine of Amazon, and they produce work by emerging writers, so no one who has published a full book yet. And what they do is they put together the magazine on Kindle, so you can get it on a Kindle app or a Kindle itself. And it's one story and one poem with an interview with the authors sent to your Kindle or your phone once a week. And Day One was great to work with because they have such a broad fan base and readership that it's great publicity for a new writer. You just reach so many kinds of people that you can't with a traditional magazine.
When you get comments about your writing, good or bad, how does that make you feel? And tell us a little bit about some of those comments. I mean, I imagine you put this writing out and then all of a sudden people write comments to it. So tell us about that.
I haven't had too many. And at least with the bad ones, somebody still read your work. So that's a good thing. But with the good ones, I think people just connect to the emotions that are going on in the story, to, the sense of loss and grief and abandonment that happens there. And I think the ones that are maybe a little bit more critical are, they ask me, why did you decide to tell this story? Why did you decide to tell it in the way that you did? Because it's from an unusual point of view. But it's great to hear back from readers. That's actually a writer's dream. We put these stories out into the world, and it kind of feels like it's in the ether when no one responds to you. So maybe somebody read it, but you're never going to know until they write you. So I would suggest anybody who's a reader to write their favorite authors and, just have a conversation with them.
One of the things you do is focus on how everyday people can get implicated in crime. Talk about that. I mean, why that niche?
Well, I think it's something that we don't tend to think about right off the bat when we think about crime. There's the victim and the criminal involved, right? But the effects of crime and violence extend so far beyond that to the full town is affected, groups of people are affected, even people who weren't involved in the actual event are affected somehow. And I think when I was writing this story, I thought about big social problems and who's involved in that. And to me, it was, if we don't actively fight against in some way or in our own way against injustices, are we still part of the problem? And unfortunately, violence pushes you into having to make that decision.
Is that happening more often than you think the average American thinks? People, innocent people, or everyday people getting implicated in crime?
I think so. If you think about the United States and Mexico specifically, it's well documented that the drugs come up from Mexico and that the weapons go down in what they call the Iron River. And, systematically, we've created a situation, whether it's the individual person or the government or the DEA or whatever, has created a situation where this continues to happen. And if we don't get involved, if we don't think about it, if we don't think about our individual actions, I mean, even people who might use drugs recreationally don't think, oh, there's blood on my hands. But essentially, there's a situation going on. And so I think that, there's a lot to think about when we think about violence and big social issues like this.
Do you think the average American, I mean, you've done your homework, you've researched a lot about the drug violence, and, as you mentioned earlier, you spend a lot of time reading material about it. Do you think we understand really how bad the drug situation is?
I think depending on where you live and how involved you are with these areas, you might know more and understand. But the average American, I don't think does. Like, there are thousands of people who have died as a result of the drug war there. A lot of people who've tried to immigrate up here because of it. It's a very big situation. Even on the Oscars last night, uh, the man who won Best Director, I believe, Iñárritu for Birdman, is from Mexico, and he talked about how Mexicans. He hopes that Mexicans are able to create a government that serves them, and that's not happening right now.
Talk a little bit about the local writers and how they've impacted you or assisted you in your writing. I mean, is it important for someone from Bakersfield, because Bakersfield is not New York, it's not Los Angeles, it's not London.
Right.
Are the local writers important in the swing of things for someone like you?
I think it's always nice when someone who's from your area can support you because they understand what it's like to live in a culture that's not necessarily book oriented or literary oriented. Nick, who was the leader of Random Writers Workshop, was very inspiring to me because he's one of the few local authors from Bakersfield that has published work and that continues to publish literary fiction and literary nonfiction. And so that's inspiring to you when you know people one on one personally to get you to want to be out there. So yeah, the New York pressure is hard. You're like, I'm not from this big place where everybody knows everybody else, but it's really nice to have Valley support.
Is there a lot of money to be made in this industry? And I say that because, there was a book, 50 Shades of Grey, and that book sold millions and millions of copies. Whether you agree with the content or not, you have to admit that that book sold a lot of copies. And now that it went to film, the other day I was reading some numbers, and the numbers are incredible that people are watching it. So the author of that book has made a lot of money doing this. I mean, is that typical of an author?
For the most part, no. There are so many books out there that that does not happen for, not even close, not even books that win big awards. But there are those runaway successes. I believe 50 Shades of Grey was self published at first and picked up steam, literally or metaphorically. And then, just was a runaway. But a lot of it has to do with marketing. If a company or a publisher pushes you and invest money into you, then maybe you'll get picked up. But it's every author's wish to get a movie made about their book or have thousands of people buy it like J.K. Rowling. But I don't think it happens for most people.
Well, and another, as you're talking, one of the other authors that I thought of is, the Hobbit movies where, the lady would write, single mother or whatever. I don't want to, say stuff that's not true about her, but, she was going through some hard times and then she writes this book and, now all of a sudden it's a bestseller.
Yeah, it's certainly a fairy tale, I think. And, but it does resonate with people. So I don't know. It just depends on who you are and if you're writing at the right time, I guess.
So let's talk about Front Porch a little bit. You're the managing editor of Front Porch. Tell us what that is and where we can read it and what to expect when we read it.
Front Porch is the literary magazine and journal out of Texas State University's MFA program. We are online only, so we're free to read, which is great for you because you don't have to pay for it. You can read it at www.frontporchjournal.com, and we have great fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and then something special about us in particular is that we do extensive author interviews and video readings. So we have hundreds of video readings of famous authors and Q&As where, people ask about their work, how they wrote it, where they're from, those kinds of things. So you can find all of that on our website.
What is your ultimate goal as a writer? I mean, are you writing to become this big author that everybody's buying the book and everybody's watching a movie eventually made out of your stories? Or are you writing because it's a way to express yourself?
I would love for my writing to reach that level of success, but it's not why I write. When I put pen to paper or my fingers to the keyboard, I think about not only the messages that I want to send to the world, but also how to interpret the world and remake it to understand it. And I think that a lot of stories are told because we have trouble understanding the world. There are things that happen that are difficult to understand why they happened or how they happened. And I think that writing kind of recreates that and allows us to get a better understanding of humans, of our emotions, of society, of history. And that's really one of the reasons I write is to figure it out for myself and see if other people connect to that.
Should we expect more short stories from you? I mean, are you working on something longer, or is your style just short stories?
I do have short stories I'm sending out, so hopefully you can expect to read those at some point. But my current project is a novel that I'm working on. I tend to be a writer who writes long. So even with the Suitcases of San Leon that I just published with Day One, it's a little bit longer of a story, about 25 pages. And that was whittled down as much as I could. The novel is about a group of girls who end up murdering another girl. And it has to do with examining where evil comes from, how it happens, how teenage girls experience social pressure in today's society. And that's just kind of what I'm exploring in that book.
You know, the world of writing is changing. I mean, if you would have asked a writer 50 years ago, publishing a book was much different. Now with technology and everything else coming up, and who knows what the future is going to hold, what are some keys to success? I mean, it's no longer that you have to wait for someone to actually publish your work. You can actually go publish your own work.
Right. Well, first of all, you have to make sure the writing's good. You know, you have to tell a good story, entertain people, write well, practice. But after that, there are so many options. Like you said, there is self publishing, which a lot of people do, and it's right for some people. But uh, a publishing company can give you a certain authority and step up in the business. So it depends what kind of writing you want to do for serious literary fiction or nonfiction. It's everybody's dream to get published with, you know, like Penguin or Random House or any of those places. But it just really depends on what you want to do. And there are a lot of well known authors self publishing or kind of publishing through direct ebooks now, and they do well with it. So I guess the steps to success would be really making sure the writing's good and then figuring out your marketing plan and where you want to go, because the writer is really expected to do their own publicity, their own marketing, reaching out to authors, building a fan base.
You went exactly where I want to go next, is self-promotion. How
Yes.
important is that? And how important, I mean, and I say that, but you know, maybe 20 years ago, self-promotion was a bad word. And even today, maybe in some circles, self-promotion is a bad word. But reality speaking, how important is it?
Oh, it's hugely important, and it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, especially writers, because they tend to not want to talk about themselves. But if you think about J.D. Salinger or Thomas Pynchon, who never had to show up, who never had a picture taken of them for years and years, that just doesn't happen anymore. It's just practically impossible. So, you know, promotion is that dirty word. It sounds like selfishness, narcissism, but it's just how it works. Your work's not going to get out there unless you just buckle down and do it. And I try to think of it as there are other people who want to reach out to me and I'm reaching out to them. So it's just the nature of the beast of the 21st century, I think, with social media and all that. You have to.
How can you know if your work is good? I mean, let's say someone has written an article or something, and to them, they don't feel like it's good, but to the world, it may be good. How do you know, or do you even know?
I think that's like the $1,000,000 question. Self-assessment can be very difficult for some people. You know, it goes some ways where some people think they're great and they need more work. And then, like you just mentioned, people who maybe are a little too hard on themselves. And the first thing you can do is get other people to read it. So, trusted readers, community workshops. That's what Random Writers was so great for, is you got some people's eyes on your work to give you feedback, because in your little cave of writing, you're never going to know what the world's response is going to be. So I think just trusting your voice, trusting your level of judgment about yourself, and then getting people to read it for you helps a lot.
What about to the high school student or the elementary school student who likes to write, they don't know if this is for them, but they like to write? What advice would you give them?
I would say that if you like to write, keep writing. Don't censor yourself. Don't think that anybody else is going to do it for you. You know, writing's one of those things that you can do on your own. You can develop on your own. You can read and kind of copy and learn from the greats. And I think that if you have an interest in it, you probably are a writer. It may not be your profession, but that spark is within you. So, especially for elementary and high school, I would say find other people who are interested in reading and writing like you are too, because it's hard to find people who are who have the same interests as us. And once you do find them, you can just grow so much within a community.
Tell us how people can find out more information about you, where they can find some of the work that you've done. I mean, how does our audience members here in Fresno, the area of Fresno and Sanger in the Valley, how do they find information about you?
So I have a personal website. It's www.jane, as in no, Hawley, Hawley. I know that's a lot to spell. You can look for me there or just Google me. My Twitter account is the same. And then always, if you go to Front Porch, my information is there as well. So any way to contact me is absolutely fine. My website also has some interesting articles that talk about some of the things that we've discussed today.
We are almost out of time here at San Joaquin Spotlight, but, I wanted to ask you this question because some people may be critical of you that you've decided to write about the cartel violence. I mean, what do you have to say to the critics?
Well, I think that, to just be clear about the criticism for people who may be listening on radio is I'm a young female, white American writing from the point of view of a group of male Mexican, older bus depot workers. And that seems like a very different kind of point of view to write from. But, what I've learned is that the story chooses you sometimes. And if you are as authentic to that point of telling, to that culture, you do your homework, do your research, like you just have to have faith and go with it. So I try to respect the culture as much as I can and get everything right. But then I just try to tell a story about people, and that's all I can do.
We are out of time this week on the program. Jane, thank you for coming on the program. Good luck to you in school, and good luck to you in your future writing.
Thank you, you too.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. To the volunteer crew that made this production and every production possible, thank you. Their names will appear at the end of the TV broadcast of this. We couldn't do the show without them. Here we are in the evening on a weekday in the studio making this happen. Thank you to our friends at 90.7 KFSR Fresno on the FM dial. And thank you to our audience members watching and our friends at CMAC, Community Media Access Channel, Community Media Access Collaborative. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Tune in next week to a new edition.